In the spring of 1914, in a basalt quarry at Oberkassel near Bonn, workers cut into a grave that had been sealed since the end of the Ice Age. Inside were two human skeletons, an older man and a younger woman, laid down with care. Between them, or close enough to belong to the same act of burial, were the remains of a dog. At first glance, it looked like a tender beginning. One of the oldest known domestic dogs in the world, resting beside human beings 14,000 years ago on the edge of a warming Europe. The image seemed almost too perfect. If one of the earliest unmistakable dogs was here, in a grave in Germany, then perhaps the story began here too. Perhaps Europe was where wolves first crossed the invisible line into companionship. But there was something strange about that grave, something easy to miss if you only look at the bones as evidence of affection. Why was this animal already being treated as someone who belonged? That question matters because the Oberkassel dog was never just an animal in a pit. It was a witness. And for more than a century, it seemed to witness the wrong version of history. For a long time, the origin story of dogs was told as if it ought to be simple. Wolves approached human camps. The least fearful survived. Over generations they changed, becoming smaller, calmer, more tolerant, until one population, in one region, became the first dogs. After that, the story spread outward, humans moved, dogs followed, and the oldest friendship in our species' history began to circle the planet. There were many arguments over where that first step happened. Europe had its supporters because some of the earliest dog-like bones were found there. Others pointed east, toward China or Siberia. Still others argued for the Near East. But even when the map shifted, the underlying assumption stayed largely intact. One cradle. One origin. One clean threshold from wolf to dog. Ancient DNA did not confirm that picture. It destabilized it. Once geneticists began pulling recoverable DNA from prehistoric dog remains, and then from ancient wolves themselves, the neatness started to collapse. The surprise was not only that dogs were older than once assumed, though that mattered. The deeper shock was that by the time we can already see dogs clearly in the genetic record, they are not emerging. They are dispersed. They are structured. They already carry the signatures of a long prehistory that had happened mostly out of sight. A major study of ancient dog genomes showed that by around 11,000 years ago, dogs had already split into at least 5 distinct ancestry lineages spread across different parts of Eurasia and the Americas. In other words, by the dawn of the Holocene, dogs were not a new experiment confined to one valley or one tribe. They were already a diverse world population. That alone pushes their beginnings further back into the Paleolithic, well before farming, before villages, before herds of sheep and cattle. Dogs were first. Not as a byproduct of agriculture, but as a creature shaped in the age of hunters, ice, and long-distance survival. That changed the scale of the mystery immediately. If dogs were already this diverse 11,000 years ago, then the familiar archaeological sites in Europe were not the place where the story started. They were places where the story had already arrived. And then the wolf genomes began speaking. In one of the most important turns in this research, scientists assembled dozens of ancient wolf genomes spanning roughly 100,000 years, from Europe, Siberia, and North America. This was a different kind of investigation. Earlier debates had often compared modern dogs to modern wolves and tried to reconstruct the past from living populations. But modern wolves are not frozen relics of the Ice Age. They have histories of their own, with migrations, bottlenecks, extinctions, and interbreeding. To understand dog origins, researchers needed older wolves. Not symbols of wildness, but actual wolves from the time when domestication might have happened. What they found was unsettling in the best scientific sense. Dogs, both ancient and modern, were overall more closely related to ancient wolves from Eastern Eurasia than to ancient wolves from Western Europe. That alone weakened the old European origin idea. But the picture did not resolve into a simple Eastern birthplace either, because some early dogs, especially those linked to the Near East, Africa, and later parts of Europe, also carried ancestry from a second, more Western wolf-related source. So the old story did not merely move east. It broke apart. The emerging genetic picture suggests that all dogs carry ancestry from an Eastern Eurasian-related wolf source. But some lineages also carry a substantial Western contribution. That leaves scientists with two broad possibilities. One is that wolves were domesticated more than once in different regions and those early dog populations later mixed. The other is that domestication happened once, perhaps in the East, and as dogs spread into southwestern Eurasia they interbred with local wolves, absorbing a Western ancestry component. At the moment, the evidence cannot cleanly choose between those scenarios. That is the point ancient DNA revealed with greatest force, not a tidy answer stamped onto a map, but the falseness of the tidy question. The origin of dogs was never a single arrow pointing from one place to the rest of the world. It was older, more mobile, and more entangled with vanished wolf populations than earlier generations imagined. And vanished is an important word here. One of the most consistent findings in this field is that dogs do not seem to descend from any living wolf population exactly as it exists today. Their ancestors came from an ancient wolf lineage, or set of closely related lineages, that has either gone extinct or been genetically blurred beyond recognition by later wolf history. That means the ancestor of the dog is not simply running through some northern forest waiting to be identified. The true progenitor may already be gone. So now the mystery becomes more haunting. We are not looking for the moment when a modern wolf became a dog. We are looking for a relationship between humans and a wolf world that no longer exists. That world was the late Pleistocene, cold grasslands, mammoth steppe, migratory game, human bands moving across enormous distances, and wolves doing the same. In such a landscape, the old fable of a few tame wolves drifting into campfires starts to feel inadequate. The process may still have involved scavenging around human settlements, as many researchers propose, but those settlements were not villages. They were Paleolithic camps in ecosystems of extreme seasonality, where food, danger, and mobility linked people and predators in intimate ways. Some scholars have proposed that domestication may have begun in Siberia during the last glacial maximum, perhaps as early as 23,000 years ago, when human groups and wolves could have been isolated in overlapping refugia under harsh climatic conditions. That hypothesis is compelling in part because it helps explain how dogs might have accompanied some of the first people into the Americas. But even its supporters are cautious. The archaeological evidence is sparse. The genetic signal is suggestive rather than final. The broader lesson is not that Siberia has been proven beyond doubt, but that the old search for a single obvious homeland has given way to a more demanding kind of history, one that must account for movement, mixing, and deep time. And once you follow that path, the meaning of the dog changes too. The first domesticated animal was not born into a farming world of pens and grain storage. It emerged, somehow, in the social universe of hunter-gatherers. That fact should stop us. Before goats. Before cattle. Before horses. Before cities. Before writing. Humans entered into a durable relationship with a large carnivore. Not with prey. Not with a source of milk. Not with an animal selected first for meat or traction. With a competitor. That alone suggests that domestication was never just an economic event. It was perceptual. Behavioral. Mutual. Wolves were already experts at reading movement, coordinating in groups, tracking over distance, and living within complex social hierarchies. Humans were doing something equally unusual, building cooperative worlds through language, planning, and shared intention. Somewhere in the Ice Age, those two intelligences began adjusting to one another. We should be careful here. Ancient DNA can show ancestry, divergence, admixture, replacement. It cannot directly show the first look held too long across a camp boundary, or the first juvenile wolf tolerated because it barked an alarm at the right time, or the first humans who found that another predator could become a partner rather than a threat. But genetics can tell us that by the time history leaves us better evidence, that relationship had already become powerful enough to spread across continents. It also tells us the relationship was not static. Dog history often parallels human movement, but not perfectly. When early farmers moved into Europe, dogs moved with them and mixed with resident dog populations, much as human groups mixed. Later, some human expansions transformed human ancestry far more dramatically than dog ancestry. In other cases, dogs changed more than the people around them did. This is not the history of an accessory trailing behind human destiny. It is the history of another population, with its own structure and its own entanglements, braided into ours but not reducible to it. Even diet left traces of that companionship. Genetic changes linked to starch digestion appear in dogs as human ways of eating changed, though unevenly and not all at once. In some places, dogs adapted alongside agricultural lifeways. In others, older foraging patterns lingered in canine genomes. The dog was not just traveling with humans, it was entering human ecologies, human waste streams, human rhythms of hunger and abundance. Which brings us back to that grave at Oberkassel. The unanswered detail was never simply why a dog lay beside two humans. The deeper question was why the burial already felt so intimate, so socially legible, so complete. Ancient DNA gives us a way to answer that without reducing it to sentiment. By the time that dog was buried in Ice Age Europe, the partnership was already ancient. It had depth behind it. Thousands of years, perhaps more, of shared adaptation and movement had already passed. And the Oberkassel dog may have something else to tell us. Researchers have suggested that the young animal suffered from a severe illness, possibly distemper, and survived long enough that it may have required sustained care. If that reading is correct, then the burial was not only symbolic. It may preserve evidence of attention, patience, and investment in a creature that could not immediately repay the effort. Again, caution is necessary. We should not build grand emotional certainties from a single skeleton. But the possibility matters because it aligns with what the genetics already imply. This was not a fresh experiment at the edge of tolerance. It was a relationship with history behind it. So the truth ancient DNA revealed is stranger than the title we might give it. Not that the origin of dogs has been pinned neatly to one spot on a map. Not that all debate is over. It is almost the opposite. The truth is that dogs were never what we thought in relation to their own beginning. They were not the simple product of one village innovation, nor the obvious descendants of any modern wolf population we can point to today. They seem to come from a ghost population or ghost network within the wolf world of the Ice Age. Their ancestry carries Eastern roots, but in many lineages also a Western contribution. Their diversification began astonishingly early. Their spread across the planet began before agriculture had remade human life. And by the time they enter the archaeological light in places like Europe, they are already heirs to a much older story. That should alter how we see the animal sleeping in our homes now. A dog is often described as familiar, and of course it is. Few creatures are more woven into the ordinary texture of human life. A leash by the door. A shape at the foot of the bed. Paws on a kitchen floor. But familiarity can hide scale. The domestic dog is also a surviving trace of Ice Age diplomacy, a living archive of encounters between human bands and vanished wolves under glacial skies. Its face has changed. Its body has been remade again and again by breeding, labor, fashion, and whim. Yet beneath that astonishing variety is an origin story that remains partly unresolved, not because science failed, but because the reality was larger than the myth it replaced. Ancient DNA did not shrink the mystery. It gave the mystery proper dimensions. And so that grave near Bonn looks different now. Not like the cradle of the dog, but like a late echo from a relationship already old when those mourners covered the bones. The animal in that burial was not standing at the beginning of the story. It was standing in the middle of one of humanity's deepest alliances, carrying within its body the memory of wolves no one will ever see alive again. If you enjoy documentaries that follow evidence until familiar things become strange, you're welcome to stay with this channel. Because sometimes the oldest companion in the room is also the most ancient riddle, and sometimes the clearest sign of how far back a bond runs is not the first track in the snow, but the moment someone chose, long ago, not to leave the body behind.